All right, thanks for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here, Monday through Friday, live on YouTube, 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, and on all of our subscribing platforms. Ramsey Denison is here. He is the creator of the documentary film Money Machine. The third anniversary of the Las Vegas mass shooting is October 1st, tomorrow. And this new documentary, Money Machine, exposes a cover up. Ramsey, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
You're in Vegas. You were close to the situation there. I want to just give a little background in terms of an overview of what happened that day, and then I want to ask who this guy Paddock was. But what happened that day?
Well, it was the route last day of the Route 91 concert. There were over 20,000 fans in attendance, and by all accounts, it was a great event until it wasn't.
Mm.
If you talk to people over there, that they'll tell you that whole Route 91 was a phenomenal success until the very end there. And then what happened was just after 10 p.m. on Sunday, October 1st, Stephen Paddock opened fire on that crowd of over 20,000 people. And sadly, 58 people were killed and hundreds were injured. And it took the LVMPD 70 minutes to get up into Stephen Paddock's room. So, and the story that Money Machine tells is really one of kind of a corporate cover up, and kind of the cushy relationship between MGM and the LVMPD. MGM, who donates to the police department, and and a lot of people didn't realize that this happened in an election year. So Sheriff Joe Lombardo was trying to get reelected.
Hmm.
So anything that showed his department's incompetence that night wasn't going to be something that, when you're on not only a national stage but an international stage. These were the things that had to not come out. These were the things that had to get buried, and that's what they did. They did a good job of burying it.
So then your contention is that they buried the actual story, or they downplayed it as a way to preserving the image of the hotel, of preserving Las Vegas generally, of trying to preserve at least incompetence on the part of law enforcement on that day. Now, I've seen hotel footage of Paddock literally going into his room with these enormous bags that look like gigantic golf bags, but very suspicious.
Right.
And there were reports from people at the scene that there was more than one gunman. There was more than one source of bullets flying from that hotel onto the crowd. Um, what can you tell us about those events, and also the really inexplicable video of policemen basically mulling around outside of his door while you could hear gunshots?
I mean, when you hear that somebody's firing um, into a crowd of 20,000 plus people and then people are being killed, that's obviously a pretty serious situation. And one question I don't think has ever been adequately answered is why couldn't the police get through that door in 5 or 6 minutes rather than 70 minutes? Okay, and
70 minutes. So that's already
70
over an
minutes.
hour.
So yeah, from when Stephen Paddock started fire to until the LVMPD actually entered his room was 70 minutes. And not only that, but when the LVMPD did enter Stephen Paddock's room, they couldn't even do so without a gun going off. There was an accidental discharge. So it was flat out incompetence. And there was a cover up of that incompetence because you're on an international stage and Joseph Lombardo couldn't look like he's trying to become the next sheriff. And so there was definitely an effort to kind of bury this stuff and have it not come out. And actually that officer who was in position to do something, who was cowering in the hallway, his name was Cordell Hendricks. And something very interesting happened after that. Not only did Sheriff Joe Lombardo not even mention that there was an act that his police officers were so incompetent they couldn't even enter a room without their guns going off, but he also didn't mention that that Cordell Hendricks was like cowering in a hallway to stop and could have stopped us and did so. But even after months and months passed, what happened was major publications like Associated Press and LA Times and stuff, they wanted this body cam footage. They wanted the 911 calls from the night of 1 October, and the LVMPD wouldn't give it to them. So they played this game of like, I don't know if you remember, there was a lawsuit, like 7
Yeah.
really large media companies, Associated Press, LA Times, Las Vegas Journal, et cetera. They all kind of got together and filed a lawsuit against the LVMPD to force the release of these documents. And so Sheriff Lombardo used, they actually used this lawyer that everybody calls Tricky Nicky, because he's, you know, like a lot of lawyers,
Mm-hmm.
he's like, and he kind of, so because of all this like legal wrangling, so Sheriff Joe Lombardo and the LVMPD are actually spending public funds to hire lawyers to prevent the release of public information, which is what those 911 calls are. And this is outrageous. I mean, that, you know, these are
Yeah.
not, these
And
are,
this was the biggest mass murder in the history of the United States, and it was
yeah,
an international story. The whole world was watching and to
right,
find out what was happening, and they're playing like local petty politics. And the one of the things that I was struck by, and I've seen your trailer, I haven't seen the movie. The movie is going to be out tomorrow, and you've been already very favorably reviewed in several film, you know, viewings around the country. And that is that I could understand. I mean, putting myself in their shoes, I could understand why the police might have been frightened and fearful about going in the room. Nobody wants to go in a room with a live shooter, but they didn't even look like they were. They looked casual, like they were just sort of hanging around and having a cigarette or something.
right. Well, no, but here's the thing, and I agree with you. I wouldn't want to go into a room, but you signed up to do that job, okay?
Right,
If you
sure.
signed up to be a cop, you know it's not going to be all like roses and peaches, right? So if you signed up to do that job, when it hits the fan, you got to go in there and do something, in my
Right.
opinion.
Or at least they could have called somebody. They could have called, national. There's several people that could have been brought in. This is a
Right.
huge emergency. I mean, somebody machine gunning a live crowd of 1,000 people. I mean, this is not, maybe it was more than they felt they could handle. Well, fine. I mean, why didn't they bring in SWAT teams, or, they called the state, or, somebody to come in?
Well, I mean, you bring up an interesting point. Like, I mean, you have a crowd of over 20,000 people, and it's long been known after 9/11 that something like this could happen and that Las Vegas would likely be the next target.
Hmm.
That wasn't a surprise to anybody. I mean, I can tell you that, I have a lot of friends who are retired cops on the LBMP, and they said that after 9/11, like this was kind of told to everybody, like, listen, we are likely the next terrorist destination or whatever. So it's been known that something like this could happen for a long time, and yet they weren't prepared for it. MGM wasn't prepared for it, and the LVMPD wasn't prepared for it. They got caught, and I think it's not an accident that Stephen Paddock did this on a Sunday night, right? When
Hmm.
everybody's kind of like like in the closing hours of the concert, where everybody's kind of guard is let down.
Sure.
So, I think he got him, and he got him, and he shouldn't have been able to, but he did, and that's what nobody wants to admit is that,
He
MGM
just
and
he just walked
yeah.
right in, rented a room, and did it. Now, who was Stephen Paddock? I mean, what was his deal?
Well, that was actually, we were fortunate enough to get an interview with his brother Eric, who probably knows Stephen better than just about anybody in the world, because those two were good friends. They were in business together, had real estate ventures together, which were successful, by the way. Well, Stephen Paddock was somebody who was a millionaire at one time, smart. Everybody says he was smart. Um, Even his ex-wife didn't have a lot of negative things to say about him. He was rather a kind of controlled individual. I interviewed, a bellboy who dealt with him repeatedly and said that Stephen Paddock was, quiet, sometimes a little moody, good temper. So nobody really who knew him particularly had a lot of negative things to say about him. I mean, obviously they do now because he's a psycho and a monster who did something
Right.
inexcusable.
What sort of
But
business was he in?
he was actually in. I think he started off working for, I believe, the post office, and he'd been like an accountant, and then he basically retired from that and then started doing like he had properties. So he had like apartments that him and his brother Eric, who I interviewed, they had like some property ventures that they were very successful at. They made a lot of money at that. And so that's another thing I learned from Eric. Eric was really the key to the movie. Is that
Hmm.
basically Steven he wasn't trying to make money in the casinos necessarily. He was basically trying to, if you can break even, if you can gamble and break even, remember this guy's retired. He has nothing better to do. If you can break even and then come out ahead on the comps and have your shrimp cocktails and go to shows for free and be treated
Right.
like a high roller, that was like an exciting thing for him to do. So he wasn't trying to like take millions out of the casino, and he didn't. But he was a good gambler and he did know what he was doing. And so what his brother Eric explained to me is that Steven was very angry, with just how he felt like he'd been kind of jerked around by MGM and the casinos in general, that they play this game of like, oh, you're a high roller, come play with us, and here's your free this, and here's your free
Right.
that.
Sure.
Oh, wait a minute, you're actually really good at this. Okay, well, we're going to start cutting off your comps, and everybody else gets 3x points on this machine at midnight, but not you. And so it was things like that, according to his brother Eric, that they were taking the stuff away. And obviously, none of that justifies what he did. But
Exactly. I mean,
but even monsters have motives, you know.
so he had a beef with the casino and he wanted to get revenge. Now, some of the mainstream media reported that, and I can't quite cite the reporting source right now, but that he had converted to Islam like about 3 months, 5 months before the shooting. Is that true?
That's a bunch of crap.
Okay.
Didn't
Okay.
happen. And that's straight from his brother. Um, yeah, he said his brother Eric says Stephen was not a religious person.
Right. But it's just, it doesn't still add up that, you have a
Right.
beef with a hotel or with a former employer. You might want to, I can understand that kind of rage, but to translate that into going up and plotting and then carrying out a mass murder of just people at a concert,
Well,
it
yeah.
just doesn't add up.
Well, yeah, but you're saying that as a rational human, right? You're a
Sure.
rational, reasonable human, right? Is
Right.
Stephen Paddock a I mean, is somebody who kills 58 people, is that a rational, reasonable human? So you
Well,
have to
well,
kind
well.
of
I,
climb
I
into
would
the
I would suggest that it was rational in that he premeditated it, planned it, and carried it out. It wasn't like he was just in some kind of a mad, crazed state. He deliberately, quietly, and carefully carried out this murder. He had thought about it in advance, and he planned it, and then did it. So it
No,
just
you're right,
makes
and that's all true. But what I'm saying is, like, when you hear these stories about like postal workers, were notorious for many years of like just snapping and going into post offices and killing a bunch of people. It's like it
that's
doesn't
true.
have to add, huh? Yeah,
No,
it
you're
doesn't
right.
have to
That's an
add up.
example.
Like it doesn't. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's hard to climb into the mind of somebody sick enough to do this. And monsters have motives. They're terrible and they're stupid. And they don't make sense to us, but they still do these acts. And Stephen Paddock did this, and I
Well,
agree with you. I mean, yeah.
I suppose that the fact that there was a cover up to try to save people's ass, the political figures and the police, it makes it opens the door up to people who want to think about conspiracy because there is a cover up. So then the next question is, well, why? What are they covering up? And so I have to ask you, did you find any evidence that Stephen Paddock might have been connected to some kind of an international syndicate or some kind of an organization of some sort that might have had a motive to just commit mass murder in the United States?
I mean, there was a lot of talk about ISIS,
Yeah,
but I don't think I never saw any compelling evidence in that direction. There was also a lot of argument that he was like selling got arms and stuff.
sure.
Um, and that theory in particular, I think, is an interesting and good one. The selling arms. However, nobody's ever really closed the deal with that. Like showed that that he was absolutely doing that or that's really what was happening. Then the other question you have is if you're going to sell arms, to somebody. Stephen lived in Mesquite, Nevada, which is maybe an hour, it's like outside of Vegas. Why would you not just have like a storage locker and meet these people and sell them like that? Why are you going to like,
Why
oh, here's my
shoot?
guns,
Yeah.
I'm going to take them 32 floors up, and so that's the part to me that didn't add up. I was very interested in that theory early on and looked into it, and I just couldn't find anything to really say that conclusively had happened.
And what about the theory of a second or third gunman?
That's an interesting, we really go into great depth on that in the film, because
Okay.
that's a lot what a lot of people thought. And I initially thought there was, okay, because if you talk to a lot of people who were there that night, they will tell you that they felt like there was a second shooter, not because they saw one, but because they felt like they could never really escape the gunfire, meaning that wherever they ran or whatever, it was loud, and it felt like it was right behind them. Um, However, as time passed, a different kind of picture emerged, and it started to look like, it's just, the truth is, again, no evidence, conclusive evidence pointing to that has ever really been shown. But what we did, we tried to take a scientific approach to it. And so we actually, I went to Montana and interviewed a guy, Dr. Rob Maher, who's a professor and who's written books on audio forensics. I mean, this is an expert, a true expert, who goes into courtrooms and like testifies about audio forensics. He listened to the files from that night and concluded that there was no evidence of multiple shooters, and the things he pointed out were compelling. Like he said,
Hmm.
you notice the sound wave, how there's not overlapping gunfire. Notice how the shots all have the same kind of but then the other thing that was really kind of pointing towards the single shooter was the fact that there was like 13, 14 different volleys of shots, and there were pauses between the volleys. Okay. So if you had multiple shooters and you're just there to inflict maximum carnage, why would there be pauses? Well, in
Right.
my opinion, there were pauses because Stephen Paddock was a senior citizen. I mean, he was over 60 years old, and firing those guns is rigorous, man. I mean, I actually did it. There was a cop who I fired both both of those guns that he used, not those ones, exact ones he used, but those model guns, and they kick your butt pretty good. They have a lot of kick to them, and it's very physical to fire that. So, in my opinion, he was fire off 100 shots, take a 20-second break, fire off another, etc. So
Okay.
these were
Now, you say that there was generally a downplaying of this because of the image of Las Vegas. They wanted to have people feel safe. Were people safe in the aftermath of this? I mean, how well did they learn in terms of security and making sure it didn't happen again?
well, I think they put on the Vegas is known as kind of a town of gloss and being very superficial. And I think that MGM kind of played that little game of, oh, we're improving safety and blah, blah, blah. But
Yeah,
the bottom
great.
line is one of our producers, Mike Turber, actually made it on Fox News for Fox 5, actually, rather, for, which we show in the film, for like going up that same lift elevator that Stephen Paddock rode without anybody talking to him. He wasn't a guest. He wasn't staying there. He just walked right in that lift elevator and rode up and down it over 20 times without anybody in security ever talking to him. So in my opinion, that was just more glossy PR crap by MGM.
No, I mean, hotel
Yeah,
security is pretty easy to breach. I mean, I used to work in a hotel, and I remember you could go in and out. If you knew how to do it and be undetected, there's ways to get around. Um, and that's a general problem. In Vegas, you say that they were sort of trying to improve the image, and as the old saying goes, goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas,
right.
which makes me ask. I mean, how much? I mean, how much do they cover up various crimes, including rape and robbery and whatever?
Very compelling question. So I've talked to multiple reporters who worked in Vegas, one for the Las Vegas Sun, and they told me this story, if we set aside the mass shooting for a second, of things happening in Vegas, just incredibly dark things, like, for example, like people jumping from the top floor of the Luxor and like crashing into people's tables, as they're eating. And I mean, these kind of extraordinary things happen in Vegas, suicides and things like that, and nobody ever hears about it. It never makes the news because that stuff's bad for business. But the truth is, there are a lot of suicides in Vegas, and there's a lot of like really dark things that happen in Vegas. And actually, one reporter I talked to brought up a very interesting point of like, when have you ever heard of a serial killer in Vegas? Now, certainly a lot of serial killers have been through Vegas or whatever, but you don't hear about things like that because anything that presents a danger or kind of like harms the town's image. And there's also a bellman, former bellman at Mandalay Bay, who told me a story about how, like working as a bellman, he would just see like body bags, he would see corners and body bags just come out and stuff, like people dying, and then like you just would just never hear anything about it and stuff. And so,
right. Well, somebody might just pass away too. I don't know.
Right. And yes, which does occasionally happen. But his point was that like the casino kind of like control, or just that, the news wouldn't necessarily be allowed on the property it's very controlled is what I'm trying to get at there.
I understand.
Yeah.
Now, Vegas, obviously, in the old days, had a reputation for being a mobbed up place. I mean, with Bugsy Siegel being maybe the last famous one who was executed in Vegas. What is the status of that today, do you think, in terms of organized crime?
Good question. I think a lot of people would tell you that the mob no longer runs Vegas. But I also think a lot of people would tell you that they preferred it when they did. Meaning because the mob was just old Vegas, the Vegas of the 60s, 70s, and early 80s was a place where when you walked into it, they made you feel welcome. You got a lot of comps. The food was cheap. People will tell me stories about 99-cent buffets with like steaks and stuff. I mean, geez, now a freaking beer costs $11.50.
Right.
And, so I think a lot of people feel that the mob was a more like certainly generous place. Or Vegas was when the mob was running it.
Well, who runs it now?
A corporate mob.
I see. Yeah, Harry Reid, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't want to like say the truth. The answer to that question is I don't know. I don't really know if organized crime still runs Vegas or not, or the extent. I mean, a lot of people would tell you they don't, but corporations basically run it now, and MGM is actually the largest employer in the state of Nevada.
Oh, okay. And MGM, of course, is the owner of the Mandalay, right? And they're
right. Yeah, they own over a dozen properties on the Strip. One thing a lot of people don't necessarily realize is that that Las Vegas Strip, there's really only a couple owners of all those. There's MGM Resorts International owns, I think it's either 12 or 13 of those properties on the Strip. Caesars owns most of the rest of them, and then you have a couple independent or like Cosmopolitan's owned by somebody else. The Wynn,
sure.
And then Treasure Island, yeah.
How are they doing under the situation of the pandemic? It seems like everything's just business as usual.
I don't know if that's true. Like, I think things have definitely slowed down, and because Vegas is a town where people kind of go to let their hair down and have fun, and it's just harder to do that with these awful masks on. It's just nothing about the masks and the situation.
It really takes all the fun out of it. That's for sure, for all of us.
Absolutely, it makes it like pretty much not worth doing. You just want to stay in your house and wait for this crap to be over, right?
Well, basically. So anyway, your movie is blowing the whistle on Vegas and on the Vegas shooting, Money Machine, Behind the Lies. Ramsey, where can we see it?
You can see Money Machine on iTunes on October 1st, which is the 3-year anniversary of the Vegas mass shooting.
Okay. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me today. Interesting talk.
Great. Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks a lot.